I think in so many ways also just embodies what it means to enact an ethic of care in the everyday. Plus, it's like miracle here because she is raising twins. I'm a twin. And even just one time staying at Sue's house for 2 days, I immediately called my mother. And I was like, thank you. Thank you so much for everything you do. No. But, you know, that I think as many of our panelists have said and have, I think, gestured towards, so much of the work we do is for those who are children or those who are yet to be born. And in many ways, it's how we raise up tomorrow's leaders by, you know, really nurturing and caring and sharing love with them. And in many ways, our children, I think, teach us so much about how to love and be in the world. And so I've just always found it so inspiring and beautiful. And every time that I am tired, I reflect on, you know, what an amazing, not just parent, but person that Sue is. So it's with great pleasure that I get to spend these days with her, and just to also give you a little more background about her. She's a Grand River Haudenosaunee citizen from the Mohawk Nation, Wolf Clan, and her family reside at Six Nations on the Grand River. She's an amazing host, so you'll get all the good snacks between her house and the university, which we had a love for. Her academic training includes a PhD in Native Studies from Trent University. Her MA is in American Studies from SUNY Buffalo. I think I'm still yelling. She has a BA in History from the University of Michigan and Adult Language Immersion programs through Okwewana. I said that wrong. Kantoy. I'm going to stop. Thank you. And Grand River Employment and Training. She is an Associate Professor of Indigenous Studies and History at the University of Toronto, where she also serves as the Director of the Center for Indigenous Studies. So please join me in welcoming Sue Hill.
Nyawa Sogwego, and nyawa especially to my really cool and fun friend Heidi. And it's been especially fun these last few years going through parenthood together. Even though we never get, our kids haven't met. But yeah, it's still, it's more of the, why did we do this? But still awesome. I did want to acknowledge and thank all of the people who made this event possible. It is so lovely to have the chance to be hosted in this beautiful territory. And I'm always so happy to be here. So it's really lovely to have this chance and to get to see so many people from so many places. I am truly amazed at how many people from Toronto that I get to see here who I never see in Toronto. Michelle's the only one that I actually get to see regularly in Toronto, and she's on sabbatical, so I wouldn't be seeing her otherwise. So this is really special. And I'm particularly honored to get to be a part of this amazing collection of thinkers and doers. And so I'm really honored about that. I should also properly introduce myself. Nyawiscanos Wagwego de Ondata Nigaso, Otahione ne Wagishout dat Ganyak Hyono ne Wakwanzadat. So as Heidi said, I'm a member of the Mohawk Nation of the Wolf Clan. I come from the Grand River Territory. And I also have lineage from the Ganazadage Mohawk Territory. And our ancestors come originally from the Mohawk Valley in what's now called, I guess, central eastern New York State in the Mohawk Valley. My name that I carry comes from my great-grandmother who came from Ganazadage. And it's been really interesting that her family moved from Ganazadage and eventually ended up in Manitoulin Island in Wikwemikong. And I found cousins who share like family stories that we didn't know about each other, right? And so we have a friend who's a professor now at Brock University, who is from Wikwemekong, but is descended from the same family line that I'm descended from. And we were talking, and I asked him, I was like, oh, so what do you know about like your lineage that comes from Gunnisdogging? He says, well, it was this Mohawk woman, and she was Wolf Clan. And so like, that's all we needed to know that we're cousins, right? Because even if there were other families that might have moved, I only know about my family that moved, and they had this last name Murray. We instantly knew that we were relatives. And he says, see, now you can tell the old ladies at Allegheny, because he married a Seneca woman from Allegheny, that it's true when I tell them that, like, I'm descended from these Mohawks. So I get to be, I guess, apparently another person that gets to vouch. Josh, who he did his undergrad at McMaster, and they used to call him the captive because he was this Anishinaabe guy who came to study amongst a whole lot of Haudenosaunee folks, and then eventually ends up marrying a Haudenosaunee woman. He kind of is captive. I don't know if he fully has embraced that yet, but yes. So anyway, with that, thank you so much. I wouldn't normally go on this much, but I know I have a little extra time. So in thinking about this idea that was posed around jurisdiction back, and I try to like stay in my lane, and because I'm still very much trying to understand this as a Haudenosaunee person, I figured that's what I need to be talking about and thinking about. What does this mean for us as Haudenosaunee people? And particularly, my primary focus has been in my community of Grand River, of Osage. And so that's where I'm framing my thoughts today. I won't say that these are fully connected thoughts, but it's kind of the stream of consciousness that has been flowing for me in the last few days as I worked on this. On Tuesday, we had an Indigenous Research Symposium at the University of Toronto. And so I'm sharing some of the things that I learned from some of my brilliant colleagues there.
Can you just take it off and put it on the table?
Yeah.
Thanks. The mute button keeps coming in.
Oh, okay. Better?
Yep.
Yeah, it was probably me. Okay, so in thinking about this and trying to frame it in the way my Ongohoe mind works, I came up with this idea of reclaiming our Ongohoe collective selves. In almost all of our words, when we talk about ourselves, it's always in the plural. There are, like, we can talk about our individual selves, but when we're like talking about our beliefs and our understandings, it's always in the collective. And even like Ongohoe it's by nature plural. So that's what I was thinking there. On Tuesday, my brilliant colleague, Dahotarledje, Joe Brandt, shared in the session he was talking about in terms of language as source in the field of Indigenous studies. He shared that the way he thinks about the Haudenosaunee worldview is that we are focused on this idea of balancing our consciousness with our action. And he gave the example of the Ohendangali, which is our Thanksgiving address. So we're taught that at least twice a day, every individual is supposed to give thanks. And we give thanks for the fact that we've seen another day. We give thanks for the fact that we have everything we need to live, and that's provided by the natural world since the beginning of creation. As individuals, we do this in the morning and at night, and anytime 3 or more of us gather for the purposes of work. So I heard a story once about how one time the late John Mohawk was at a Halloween party, and somebody was like, all right, well, there's enough of us here, we need to do this. And they did the Thanksgiving address at the Halloween party, and it wasn't a joke, it was, I would hazard to guess that it's probably a Newtown thing. And the other Haudenosaunee folks in the room might know what I'm talking about. So this idea about our consciousness and our action and needing to seek balance between them really does capture what particularly the Thanksgiving address talks about, because it's words and it's something that, all right, we can say we're enacting it when we speak those words, but really it's talking about those words should mirror our actions. So when we acknowledge the earth, we call her our mother. We're literally saying she provides for our lives. And in that process, that then means, like, it's a training mechanism as well. That, you know, we're reminding each other, we're training people who are learning this, that this isn't just an idea, this isn't just a concept, this should be embodied in your actions as well. And so we go through this whole process of acknowledging the natural world, acknowledging the people, and then finally talking about that we're doing all of this in a way to bring our minds together. And so there's that emphasis on this idea of the collective mind. One of my most inspiring people that I learned from, who's now gone home, one time wrote this catalog for an exhibit, for an art exhibit called Gori Nagoha. And it was the woman's mind, but it was a plural. And again, she was driving home this idea that there isn't the possibility really, like, we can think about our own single mind, but it's the collective that actually has meaning and value and usefulness in thinking about how it is that we live our lives. We also talk a lot about our responsibility to the coming faces. And there's different ways, it's in English, right? We do fancy things in English sometimes, but it's about this idea that the generations that are yet unborn, and some people will talk about it, their faces are under the ground, and that their faces are looking up at us. And this idea that, and you know, we're thinking about Donoha, our mother, the earth, that she does hold those generations that haven't yet come. And the idea that we're supposed to be gentle in how we walk on the earth, and this idea that we have an obligation to make sure those future generations are one day able to be here. Another brilliant thing that Hoteleje shared was something he learned when he was a PhD student here at UVic in the Indigenous Language Revitalization Program, was a teaching that Dr. Lorna Williams, I think it sounds like, said often. Mm-hmm. And this idea that you're not learning a word or words, you're learning a world. And so one of the key things that I think about when I think about jurisdiction back is that we have to reclaim our minds. The way we reclaim our minds is by reclaiming our languages. And that isn't just because I have known in my life some brilliant, fluent speakers, but they didn't have, I would say they didn't fully embrace the idea of the good-mindedness. Because even though they had the language, they had the words, they had the understanding, they didn't embrace it, particularly in that collective way. And so it's not just about learning the words, it's not even just about learning about what they mean, it's about learning how to understand them together and to have that collectiveness. And in particular, what came to mind for me in thinking particularly around jurisdiction, because we're talking about governance, where what are often talked about is the three principles of the Great Law. So this is our traditional governance system. In the Ganyangeha language, it's Skana, Gazastansula, and Gatnigonglio. And what that literally, like in English, the way it's been explained to me, the way it was taught to me, and I first heard this from Mike McDonald, who is an Akwesasne Mohawk, but he learned it from Jake Thomas Kent, who was a Cayuga chief from Grand River. Skana embodies both the ideas of English terms peace and health. We can't be at peace if we're not healthy, and we can't be healthy if we're not at peace. Gazastansula literally is talking about, so Gasatste is our in like power or strength, like, you know, how tough you are. But Gazastansula is about binding that strength together. And the idea of that, when you have that strength together, you have power and unity. And how that is essential to actually having good governance. And then lastly, this Ganhigonlio, that's the way that we talk about our good mind. And in our teachings, this idea of good-mindedness is the foundation of justice. And again, you can't have good governance if you don't have a just way of governing. And so these concepts are what informs the way it is that we're supposed to govern ourselves as individuals, as families, as clans, and as nations, and as a confederacy. There's a couple other examples from our language that I think are highly relevant to the point that I'm trying to get to. And we have two words, if we're doing a translation from English into Ganyag'eha, and it's very similar in the other Haudenosaunee languages as well. We have 6 total. Is that we have 2 words for want. And you'll hear this described in different ways depending on who your teacher is, but if I'm going to say, I want to see a movie, igerle, because it's something that I want to do, like I really want to do it, but does my life depend on it? No. If you're talking about something that your life depends on, then you use the term dewagara wanjoni. And you can only use dewagara wanjoni when you're talking about things that you need to survive. So, a piece of chocolate, unless you have nothing else, it's igerle. But if it's corn soup, it's dewagara wanjoni. And so it actually, there's also like nutrition lessons that can be used in that. Some of us are better about following those than others. But also thinking about when, as humans, there's lots of things that we desire in our lives, right? And some of them are things that we need to survive, and some of them are things that we might convince ourselves we need to survive, but that we probably don't need to survive. And I would suggest that in our community, and probably many, I would say probably all Haudenosaunee communities, and probably many of your communities as well, that's where some of our most major struggles lie, is trying to find balance between what we need and what we want. Because in the end, when we emphasize the need, or when we emphasize the want rather than the need, that's when we start to have problems, because we end up with an imbalance. And particularly, in thinking about this idea, dewagara wanjoni is literally referencing the earth. So ohunja is our base word for talking about the earth in the Mohawk language. So we're talking about what the earth provides for us. And I share an image here from the brilliant Mohawk Turtle Clan artist Shelley Nero. And this is a photo that she took in 1990, which was a pivotal year for lots of Indigenous communities. And it's an image of a part of our territory called Tutelo Heights. And these days, Tutelo Heights, it's actually kind of an affluent neighborhood. Mostly just settlers that live there. And most of whom don't really know why it's even called Tutelo Heights. But Tutelo Heights was one of the sites of a village of the Tutelo people who sought refuge amongst us back after the American Revolution. And they came with us when we resettled the Grand River territory as well. And Tutelo Heights is obviously a spot that overlooks our river. We're river people too. I think it plays out a bit differently for us than it does for a lot of the river folks from this part of the world. But certainly the river very much defines how we see ourselves in the world. And yeah, so this image, what I particularly loved about it is that it's this time of year. The leaves are just starting to turn color at home. But it also, this is an important time of harvest for our people. So actually, starting on Saturday, my longhouse is gathering for what we call, oh my God, I've also been dealing with a sinus infection, so I'm a little, kakoane. So it means our big foods. And it's the big harvest time for us. And it is one of the 2 most major times of ceremony in the year for us. And it's where we're gathering and giving thanks for the fact that our planting is again going to sustain us. And we're so fortunate in that our part of the world, we're able to plant things that will sustain us throughout the year. And so we gather to give thanks for that. And really our ceremonies center around how the world came to be and how it is that we maintain our responsibilities through these acts of thanksgiving. I just wanted to share a couple images as well. The image to the left comes from a youth group back at home that's focusing on revitalizing our sustenance. So we have this term in our language called junhatkwang. Anthropologists incorrectly translated it to be three sisters. There's no three in that word. I'm not even sure how that came to be. I think it was somebody told a really cool story, and the anthropologists believed that it was the story, and it took off. And these days we have all kinds of three sister stuff in our communities as a result of it. But the words in our language all come from this similar term, junhatkwang, which again is talking about being sustained by our foods. And then the image on the right is just something I swiped from a Haudenosaunee website, one of our sister communities, that it shows an image of our corn, beans, and squash. Some of you know that those plants grow well together, and we have lots of stories about our plants having spirit to them. And generally speaking, plants are female spirits, and so understanding those relationships that exist there. So I just wanted to share that image as well, and it's particularly relevant for what I'm getting to, and that is how many of our places where we could be growing food are now being consumed as places to grow tobacco or cannabis. In our community at Grand River, it's really been just this year. I'm sure it was, well, I know it's been happening for a long time in terms of people having their own little personal farms. But these days, and it started this spring in particular, where the community started to notice these large-scale grow-ups. Mm-hmm. And this image I stole from the CBC website because they've covered the story a bit. This is a site just outside the main village in our community. It's about 40 acres of land that was completely cleared. There were some trees on it. It had been farmland in the past, but I don't think it had been actively farmed for a while. And so they brought in heavy machinery, cleared the site, and literally covered it almost from like edge to edge with greenhouses. As you might assume, that's had a great impact on water flow, on the way that water is moving amongst the neighbors' lands. What I'm also hearing about, I live a few miles from the village, so we haven't experienced this yet, but a lot of people are reporting really awful smells, particularly in the early mornings. Questions are starting to arise about, well, what are they spraying? Or is it just the plants? And we're talking about thousands of plants growing in a single place, right? Which I don't think even for the people who created that particular plant ever really intended it to be grown in that way, in that capacity. This summer, our community doesn't have a very stable water infrastructure. We're one of the only communities of our size in the entire region, and I'm talking about communities in general, First Nations and non-First Nations communities, that doesn't have an adequate water system. I think about 80% of us now are still living either on wells, most of which are not very safe or aren't always functioning, or cisterns. In my house, we have a 3,000-gallon cistern. We get water delivered roughly once a month or so. This summer, when it was in really high temperatures, people weren't able to get water deliveries because the water deliveries were all scheduled to be going to the grow-ops. Thankfully, the water companies, which are private companies in the community, realized, oh wait, ASAP wasn't delivering to houses, Wilson's wasn't delivering to houses, and they're like, all right, we gotta put a stop to this. And so they prioritized home deliveries So at least homes were able to get water again. People with swimming pools were really out of luck because they still were delivering to the grow-ops. I'm guessing probably most of them, if not all of them, had contracts with the grow-ops. So in our community, we have two different governments in operation. We have a traditional system that's existed in our community that comes from our great law. It's functioned as the governing entity of our community since we resettled it in 1784. In 1924, the Canadian government imposed an elected system in our community in conjunction with a handful of community members. The first election, 27 people voted for 13 positions. So it kind of gives you a sense. These days, the voter turnout's a little bit better than that, but it's almost never been more than 10% in terms of people voting for our band council. Band council, after the Canadian federal legalization of cannabis, created a cannabis commission. I don't know how many of the folks here come from communities who may have something similar. But for us, it took them a long time to get going, but they've definitely got it going now. And this particular grow-op is one of the grow-ops that they have an agreement with. The Cannabis Commission, in their application process for a grow-op, doesn't ask questions about infrastructure of the grow-op. They don't ask, where are you going to get your water? They don't ask, what are your anticipated electricity needs? And they don't ask, how will traffic in and out of your site impact your neighbors? So what we're hearing is that the people who live next to this site are having a hard time getting in and out of their homes sometimes. There have also been reports of migrant labor being brought in to work this site. In this CBC article that I stole the image from, they interviewed the landowner, who is a community member, and who refused to give the name of the company that he works with for the migrant labor that's brought in, but he promised that they're all legally allowed to work in Canada. That hasn't yet been tested in court. I will also say that in our community, we, like many other communities, have high unemployment rates. The greenhouses were not built by community builders, and we have a lot of construction workers. We've built many of the major cities in North America. Yeah, it was very interesting that they brought in all of this outside labor to construct this monstrosity. It's literally 40 acres of greenhouses. And this is one of at least 5 sites that I've heard about. Many of them are built back off the road, so we don't always know. We learned, though, in August that another grow-op site is literally next door to my son's school. And so community members were raising questions about this. This site is less than a mile from two schools in the community. So people were raising questions about what are the concerns about safety for our kids? And I've yet to hear a formal response from either the Cannabis Commission or the Band Council that sanctions the Cannabis Commission on this. It is important, though, for us to realize this is an internal problem. This is a community member who sponsored this business and who shares the business with a non-community member officially. He's the majority owner, and he's considered the owner of the land. Interestingly enough, we learned that a housing project was given a grant, an external grant, to build this experimental housing development adjacent to this site. So the landowner of this site, his father is the architect who was hired to oversee the building, the housing project that's going to be next door to it. And it's very unfortunate. The architect is someone who's been very respected in our community. He's designed many of the buildings in our community, as well as many of the buildings and many of the institutions in the nearby area, including most of the new Indigenous themed buildings at the colleges and universities nearby. And so it's very stressful, I think, in terms of how we're thinking about this connection, this relationship. My last sort of points here, 3 weeks ago, our traditional chiefs issued an official statement about cannabis in our communities. And this is a coalescing of discussion that they've been having since 2018. They have issued, or they've made statements within council meetings, but they hadn't issued a formal press release until this, where they are now fully declaring cannabis is not aligned with our traditional values. It's particularly not aligned with the economic impacts as well as the social impacts that we see in our communities. I'm happy to share this with folks. This is just the first part of the press release, but I wanted to end particularly with the closing words from the press release. And because this is, to me, very much tying together all of these ideas about our individual minds being brought together collectively in order to ensure that the future generations have the opportunity for a good life. And so what they call into mind is our circle wampum, which is one of the original documents of our founding government. And this idea that if you choose not to abide with this declaration that they've made, that you're stepping outside of that circle wampum. And that in doing so, what that literally means is you are no longer protected by our original laws. You are not protected by the collective strength of our people. And as such, you are standing alone. And when you stand alone, then you have no protections from what it is that our collective mind can bring to you. Sadly, even though the landowner that officially owns this big site, even though he comes from a family that understands what this means, I think he's chosen to believe it isn't relevant in this case. He's bought into the idea of capitalism that really has that emphasis on the individual, and the idea that it's okay to exploit the natural world, that it's okay to exploit the labor of people, and particularly precarious people, as a means of increasing your personal value and wealth. And so I just wanted to close with that last image of the circle wampum. And what this wampum represents are our original 49 clan families, as well as the 50th chief title that represents all of those other 49 families together. It's bound by 2 strands of wampum, one being the Great Peace and the other being the Great Law. And so stepping outside of that means that you no longer have those collective rights as Haudenosaunee. How this is going to unfold, I'm not sure. What I do know is that as a parent of 2 very wild 13-year-olds, that I have an obligation to help them understand where they need to be, that inside the circle is what they're born into, and that they have an obligation to make sure that continues if they wish to continue, and to make sure that they uphold their responsibilities to those who will come after them. So now. Are there going to be questions? Okay, sorry.
No, it's not.
That, or do you want to?
No, I'm just going to introduce her, so would you rather I just do it? Okay, perfect. And now I'd like to introduce Debra Atterberry, who's a career educator and advocate for the Osage language. She worked for 20 years in the public schools of Oklahoma as a business teacher, elementary teacher, and literary specialist. And as the curriculum developer for the Osage Nation Language Department, she helped to develop a unique orthography to write the language. She's also served on the Osage Nation Congress, where she led initiatives in education, health, and culture. And during her time as a strategic planning analyst and the education services administrator for the Osage Nation executive branch, she developed the Osage Nation's immersion school. And she is currently working to develop early childhood curriculum for the Osage Language Department. Please join me in welcoming Debra.
Well, it's such an honor and a privilege to be here and talk about a community of care. I feel like I've stepped into one. From the moment I landed in Vancouver, I had text messages from people, and it's just everybody has made me feel so welcome. I was supposed to be here with my Osage relative, Jean Dennison, which I know she's very well known in this circle and among this place. But Jean was unable to be here, and she's kind of was my mentor here. Jean and I decided to, or Jean actually asked me to co-author a book with her third book, and she has, I want to read her biographies because some of you may not know Jean. Jean Dennison has her PhD, and she is the co-director for the Center of American Indian and Indigenous Studies and a professor of American Indian Studies at the University of Washington. She has spent the last 20 years witnessing, researching, and writing about Osage Nation government. She is the author of multiple academic articles and 2 books, Colonial Entanglement, Constituting a 21st Century Osage Nation and Vital Relations, How the Osage Nation Moves Indigenous Nationhood into the Future. As co-director for the Center for American Indian and Indigenous Studies at UW, Dennison has raised $8 million to support programming and grants, creating an ecosystem of care for Indigenous students, faculty, and staff at the University of Washington. Jean is, like I said, one of my Osage relatives and a very, very dear person in my life. And I was very honored that she would ask me to co-author this book with her, but the paper that I'm going to read is one that we collaborated with each other prior to this conference. I guess you might call it a precursor to the book that we are going to be co-authoring together in the coming year. The paper is... the part of it that she was going to read was in third person. So when you hear third person, that's actually supposed to be Jean up here reading it with me. And then the part that's in first person is what I had to offer for this part of our book. So anyway, without further ado, I know it's been a long day. I know everybody has been just so good and so patient all day. So if I were in an elementary school setting, I'd probably have you stand up and stretch just so you can, because I know I needed to. But anyway, I'll get into it so that we can get the day wrapped up here. The paper is called Fostering Respect for People and Place in Osage Governance. Care is not something that most Osage leaders talk about, although it can be seen as motivating much of their work. It has been abundantly clear since the beginning of colonialism that other governments, including both local or federal, are going to ignore or even work against Osage health, and the only way to ensure Osage well-being is through our own efforts. Whether it is the new Osage Nation healthcare facility or recent movements to address the water quality on the reservation, it is care for Osage people and place that drives much of, if not all, the nation-building work. Despite these motivations, centering care in Osage governments remains the challenge as colonial forces frequently work against cultures of care. This paper will lay out an Osage theory of care so that it can be centered within not just the motivations of Osage Nation building, but our nation's day-to-day operations. We will do this by first looking at our ways care has been talked about historically and how it shows up in our community spaces today through the Osage concept of respect. We will then describe several experiences from Debra Atterberry's time serving in the Osage Nation government, looking at some of the ways these commitments to care were put into practice. Care is a powerful antidote to the ways colonialism has infiltrated our governance institutions, but it is not an easy one to enact in these spaces. In the Osage context, care is perhaps most commonly framed through the concept of respect. Osages frequently name respect as a tool for caring for each other and our ways of being in the face of ongoing colonial efforts to shame and eliminate who we are. Respect in an Osage form of care that can be used to guide what governance could look like into the future based on what has worked for us in the past. Discussing older system of Osage governance, Osage elder Eddie Red Eagle Jr. explained to me, there was something beyond trust and biological relationships stronger than blood. That is called Wahoin. Everybody knew what they needed to do and they had their role. The communication was awesome. That deep relationship made it fluid and trustworthy. At its most core, Wahoin is referring to a system of relationships within the clan structure that the people to understand their role in the larger order. The Osage clan structure undergirded our social, political, religious life before the 20th century, and it is thus a useful place to see our structures fostered care prior to the challenges of colonialism. Oral histories of the Osage Nation describe the socio-political structure of the nation as consisting of multiple groups, including the Hunka Earth People and the Tsijo Sky People. Within these groups were multiple clans representing the spectrum of life on Earth. Each had their own designated role to play in specific location within the geographical layout. Okay, let's see. Layout of the houses in each village. I'm reading Jean's part, so... And in the language. So the Nohonka Jinka, little old men or advisors, also assigned each clan a specific role to play in yearly ceremonial gatherings where everyone came together and were expected to resolve any standing disputes and work together so that the ceremony could go forward. When Gene Dennison asked Red Eagle what we could learn from these earlier forms of governance, he suggested that we needed to find ways to bring that respect forward. He explained the word respect was used universally by eldership to convey humbleness in relation to God's sacred creation. With these Wahoin and even within oneself, the goal was to live the attribute of respect in daily practice, hence the common phrase, always keep respect in front of you. In this paper, we have decided to use English concept of respect to avoid taking Wahoin out of the context of the Osage clan structure, but still honor the teachings it offers. As Red Eagle explained, respect in the Osage context means understanding the limits of what you know while remaining committed to getting relationships right. Respect is something to strive toward and be guided by. It is about knowing the specific role you're supposed to play to serve the community and appreciating the role that others were playing. To participate in this system of respect, Osages need to understand their relations to each other and the world around them, which continues to be accomplished through clan names. During Jean and her daughter's naming, Red Eagle described the importance of being part of these clans to Osage historically and today. Until you had a name, Red Eagle explained, you were not considered a person because no one could understand the relationships to you. With that naming comes a dense web of relations. In your family, the name shows birth order and the attributes you were intended to have. Myself and my daughter were given the name Kiiwetinepinesiik, which Red Eagle translated as looking at the eagle. During her naming, he described how the first daughter is supposed to be in communion with the eagle and then tell the community what she has learned. He went on to say that some people understand the first daughters as bossy and that it's their role in the family structure. In the nation, the clan name also gives you a set of relations and roles. Clan names have been a powerful way in which Osages have maintained an understanding of our place in the larger order of the nation despite ongoing change. It was how respect was generated and care was fostered. Myself and my first daughter are also, and this is my part, myself and my first daughter are also named Kiiwetinepinesiik. And for me, the eagle has always been my late grandmother, Lily Big Horse Cunningham, the one I looked up to, whose vision, strength, and steadiness guided my family. I was taught to watch over, to guide, and to help steady the family and community. More generally, I have observed that the first daughters in my family have always had a special place. I learned by watching my grandmother teach my mother, and then by learning myself as I grew older. The first daughter passed on the old ways, and now it is my turn to guide the younger ones. The first daughter's role is to steady the family and keep the path clear for those who follow. In my heart, I hope and pray that my daughter will continue the Osage ways as faithfully as my grandmother has taught me. Carrying on traditions of feeding and caring for my family and others are the ways I continue that calling today. These names continue to play an important role in our Osage society, particularly during the Ilonshka, our ceremonial dances. When I was a district cook, I could easily recognize the first daughters by the way they took on their cooking roles and responsibilities. Their leadership is visible as they work, often showing a natural authority and at times a touch of bossiness. Just as important is the role of the second daughter, who supports and balances her elder sister. While the first daughter carries herself with seriousness and responsibility, the second daughter brings a lighter, more playful spirit that helps weave everything together and creates a joyful balance within the work. Watching them side by side was a powerful reminder of how each role is vital and how beautifully they complement one another. It is through this shared work that spaces of care are created. In the Ilonshka, young men are chosen to serve as drum keepers, a role of great honor and deep responsibility. My son Matthew was asked to take on the sacred role at just 10 years old. Although my immediate family felt the weight of what was being asked, my family elders strongly encouraged us to accept the drum. My uncle, who had been a drum keeper himself, explained it in the closest way he could, that being a drum keeper is much like being a pastor, caring for your people, making them feel welcome, and ensuring that they are fed. He also reminded me that it was a year-round responsibility, requiring the parents to take their son to visit the sick and to comfort those who were in mourning. Even though drum keepers had been a part of my family before, I was hesitant at first, not out of disrespect, but because of the enormity of the responsibility. I, however, remembered my grandmother's words. If they ever offer the drum to Matthew, don't deny it. Accept it and take care of the responsibility that comes with it. She also told me, when you do take the drum for him, know that it is the highest cultural honor you could do for him. Another lesson she repeated often while raising her family was simple but powerful. She said, just be good to one another. That's all you have to do. The Osage elders I was around growing up often spoke that way, very direct, few words, yet filled with simplicity and great wisdom. These memories gave me and my family strength and guidance through this massive undertaking. Accepting the drum was not only about our son. It meant that as his parents, we would walk alongside him and take care of the work that came with it. What I quickly discovered was that hospitality was at the heart of the role. Behind the beauty and power of the dances were countless unseen hours of preparation. The family was responsible for groceries, cooking utensils, dishes, and all the supplies needed for every gathering. There was also a financial responsibility, as providing for so many required careful planning and sacrifice. Just as important was the duty to be a welcoming family. As our cooks, our relatives, and visitors came to the camp to support us in so many ways, we understood we had to greet each person warmly, making them feel included and extend genuine hospitality. Our district support was truly incredible, and it reminded us that we were never serving alone. Each June brought 3 4-day weekends of dances stretching from Thursday to Sunday. Mondays were cleaning and packing everything, and Wednesdays moving and setting up for the next weekend of dances. My daughters played important roles as well, stepping in to support their little brother and their parents, each fulfilling her place as the eldest and second daughter. There was nothing glamorous about most of the work. We were, in every sense, servants to our people. In that service, though, we were instructed by our elders what to do. We tried to foster respect and ensure that the practices could go forward. After 6 years of service, when Matthew turned 16, we knew it was time to pass the drum. The day that we did was deeply emotional. As we walked away from the dances that evening, we felt the absence deeply, having cared for the drum faithfully for so many years. Yet keeping the drum at our home remains one of the highlights of my life. My uncle reminded us that what we had done for Matthew would last far beyond those years. He said, once a drum keeper, always a drum keeper. And I just want to ad-lib this into the paper that I see that now. Matt is now 42. And I see that now we have about 120 men and women on our committee. And now I see my son sitting, and there's an order to it. He's now sitting with the top 10 men in of the district. And it's very humbling to see that, man, my son's almost an elder now. He's sitting up there with the drum keepers. So I now know what my uncle meant when he said that. Once a drum keeper, always a drum keeper, and it's so true. But that evening carried lessons about respect, lessons that shaped not only my family, but the relationship within the community and my own commitment to lead with care as a founding principle of leadership. Food in and beyond Elonchka, which is our dances, is a core method of Osage respect and ultimately care. My grandmother would frequently show respect for dignitaries, family, and friends through the act of cooking for them. Her home was always open, welcoming people daily to her table, often serving meals once and many times twice a day. Providing food in this way was truly her gift to her people. This became a guiding beacon for my own journey. Inspired by my grandmother's example, I have also worked to center my life around sharing food, especially during the Elonchka at my home in Indian camp, where I frequently host around 80 people during the Elonchka. Even beyond food, this commitment to showing respect and fostering spaces of care guided me through my career in education and Osage governance, inspiring a deep commitment to service-driven leadership. The Osage language is another key for us to look to understand what respect means in the context of Osage governance. Founder of the Osage language program, Herman Mongrain Lookout, frequently talks about the importance of respect to Osages and how the language offers us a guide for what we should look like. He frequently contrasts Osage ideas of respect, which entails extensive rules, with the American values of freedom and liberty. Succinctly summarizing these ideas in 2022, he said, "When those English people came over, they had a way of talking. They didn't have anything else here, and they weren't respectful. They call it freedom to do whatever you want. Here things are in turmoil because it feels good, because if it feels good, do it." Before the 19th century, Osage governance consisted of not only village-based leadership, but also a separate council that would meet, reflect on the world, and create elaborate protocols to address the things creating strife. In the extreme disconnect colonizers created when they came to the United States, they served their own relations to place and have attempted to sever ours. Once they were here, colonizers frequently made decisions that privileged their own personal liberty above respectful relations. Lookout worried that without the protocols that Osages developed over centuries, which he framed through the idea of respect, our world was becoming increasingly tumultuous. As Lookout argued, these distinct values, glossed here as respect and freedom, are so core to Osages and colonizers, respectively, that they are evident in our ways of speaking. Lookout would regularly name these linguistic differences through the grammatical frame of evidentiality. There are a lot more evidentials in Osage, way more than English, with the it everywhere. That relieves you. There is ambiguity in English. You see this with a lot of politicians never answering questions. They get away with a lot of things. Evidentiality is a linguistic term for how much evidence a language requires of the speaker for any given statement. For example, evidentials can mark whether an event was seen or heard and by whom. It is a way that languages demonstrate what kinds of relationships matter to their speakers and what kinds are irrelevant. As Lookout is pointing out here, very few relationships matter to English speakers, especially when compared with the ones necessary in the Osage language. Another way the Osage language embodies relationality is through the interconnection of its morphemes, word parts that have their own distinct meanings. Linguists categorize Osage as an agglutinative language, meaning morphemes have to be paired together to get the full meaning. English, on the other hand, more often relies on single morphemes that stand on their own. Lookout described this difference. That seems to be how Osage works, to put all the words together to get a meaning. You have different things you can say that mean a lot. English's concept is one word at a time. Lookout frequently described the Osage language as painting a picture, which could not be separated out into its distinct swappable parts like English. What mattered with the Osage language were thus the relationships between things, more than the isolated components. In the very structure of the language, interdependence is central to Osage, while independence is crucial to English. From these discussions, Lookout argued that what we needed as a nation is to reconnect with Osage ideas of respectful relations, which the language could teach us. Many scholars in the field of Indigenous studies have made similar observations about the relational nature of Indigenous knowledge systems. As Robin Starr, Zapatahola, Minthorn, and Alicia Fedalina Chavez succinctly put it, Indigenous epistemology is a system of knowledge built on relationships between things rather than on the things themselves. Inupiaq scholar Edna McLean demonstrates the ways this relationship shows up in the Inupiaq language, I hope I'm saying that correctly, including in the number of demonstrative pronouns used to describe relationships to the land. As in the Osage context, the language is not only an example of what relationships matter, but a tool of teaching how to enact relations of respect in that context. The notion of relations of respect also mirrors more general discussions in Indigenous studies about being relatives with responsibility. Pasqua First Nation scholar Margaret Kovach writes about the importance of relational responsibilities in Indigenous communities, noting that responsibility implies knowledge and action. It seeks to genuinely serve others and is an inseparable form of respect and reciprocity. Knowledge is required to serve others because without the knowledge, your actions might cause harm. Core to respectful relations, then, is constantly reflecting on the impacts of your current protocols and making sure that they are fostering a just world. This is a vital project for our Native nation governments to take on in this moment as we work to take over more and more control over not just the services we enact, but the systems that we govern ourselves. Focusing on how we can best foster respect, that is healthy relations between things, is that core to Osage forms of care. We can see this focus on fostering respectful relationships in the Osage context through our clan names, our designated roles during the Alonshka, our commitments to feeding and serving others, and even in our language is structured. Importantly, within these examples, we see a focus on not just the best possible outcome, but on a process that brings everyone together. This commitment to a healthy interdependence marks Osage understandings of care. In the final part of this paper, we will transcribe some examples of what this care has and could look like in the practice of Osage governance today. With the passage of the 2006 Constitution, our newly elected Congress members were responsible for building out the laws of the nation. As one of the elected officials on the first Osage Congress, I remember many of the challenges of those times and the work we were doing to try to foster care. One project I took up was the passage of an Osage law to support people and communities that were navigating meth and other drug addictions. This was personal for me, as I had seen how it had touched my own family. I had also seen how in our villages too many young, talented students slipping through the cracks at school and due to drugs ended up in prison. Despite tensions that existed between the executive branch and Congress, I worked across the table to help get this legislation passed. Getting the bill passed was deeply frustrating work, however, and it would have been easy to give up at many points. Some in Congress dismissed the bill as political maneuvering by the chief of the executive branch to build up his own standing by simply mirroring laws other Native nations had passed. These Congress members argued that meth was not a problem on our reservation. Behind the scenes, it seemed like there was more concern about giving the executive branch a win than there was about the crisis that was impacting the Osage community. The bill was repeatedly tabled for later discussion, and committee level votes kept the bill from being discussed among the full Congress. I had to work hard behind the scenes so that care did not get sidelined by politics. Passing the bill was, at its heart, an act of respect, acknowledging the struggles of the Osage people and affirming that Osage safety and well-being mattered. I found that enacting care from a leadership position was not only always about what happens in the meetings or is written into policy, however. Sometimes it's showing up quietly, standing with someone when they are most vulnerable, and treating them as community members worthy of care. Serving in Congress meant not just finding ways to work with elected officials, but also working alongside a dedicated staff who carried enormous pressure to ensure the new government was a success. With 12 elected members, each congressional staffer had to find a way to report to 12 people, and the demands during sessions could be particularly overwhelming. One young attorney the first Congress hired was exceptionally bright and unfailingly kind, but she bore the brunt of that pressure, especially as there were some Congress members that weren't always gentle or kind in their approach. I remember taking the time to meet with this staff member one-on-one several times, simply to reassure her and remind her that her work mattered. Even so, the strain weighed heavily. One day during session, she collapsed under the stress. The ambulance took her to the hospital, and without hesitation, I followed behind in my car driving to the hospital in Bartlesville to make sure she wasn't alone. I stayed with her until her husband arrived. At that time, I didn't think of it as anything out of the ordinary, but it simply felt like the right thing to do. However, this kind of care was often lacking in the Osage Nation governance spaces during this time. Trying to bring the same level of care to governance as I would to other Osage spaces felt like an important intervention into Osage governance as the new government was being developed. Following a long history of colonial-imposed governance institutions, Osage governance was struggling to enact care in practice. After serving on Congress, I became an advisor to the chiefs in the executive branch. Much of my work involved connecting with city governments and outside organizations, building relationships with local non-Osages who could move projects forward. Colonial forces have long shaped such relations on the Osage Reservation. While the reservation in Oklahoma was promised as a space Osages would be protected from settlers, it was instead a space of swindling, theft, and murder. a space where our systems of justice were stripped from us and those put in place to guard us were often the worst perpetrators. Such relations of trauma and terror are only 1 or 2 generations removed and continue to impact all the work the Osage Nation is attempting to do on its reservation. These colonial violences fundamentally disrupted not just our ways of life, but our respect for ourselves and those around us. As Osages have been made a small minority on our reservation lands, however, it becomes imperative to find ways of rebuilding respect and fostering care. I approached my work with non-Osages through an ethic of respect, which often made connections easier and more genuine. Finding common ground, speaking to others from a place of respect and centering kindness, despite the ugliness of this history, felt like the only path forward. One of my strong points as a Congress member had been working closely with the executive branch on every piece of legislation I sponsored or co-sponsored, and I carried that collaborative approach into my role as advisor. In all contexts, my efforts often focused on strengthening education initiatives, supporting health programs, and improving local infrastructure, areas where cooperation between tribal leadership and outside entities was essential. It was only through finding ways to foster respect across these divisions that this important work could go forward. Colonialism has had many negative impacts on indigenous governments, but some of the most glaring are those that these spaces continue to promote distrust, shame, and negligence. Understanding what care has looked like in previous forms of government in our community practices offers a powerful opportunity to disrupt those colonial legacies, making them again into spaces of care. These interventions sometimes take the form of policies, but more often they are about bringing your full caring self into these spaces. Of course, these spaces are often not built for such forms of care, and bringing your full self into these spaces is often not welcome. This is why gatherings such as this one are so important. In sharing strategies and creating larger community of care, we can work against the legacies of colonialism that limit the care our governments can foster. And with that, I say thank you.
Don't run too fast, Debra. We have a gift for you. We're so grateful that you were able to join us, and we, of course, are all very sad that Jean was not able to be here, but really appreciate the both of your presentations. I kept saying to Sue, I can't believe how well these two go together. We didn't really know, and I feel like it really, look at us. Mm-hmm. So we had nothing to do with it, but really fantastic presentations from both of you, and I'm sure folks have lots of questions, but we've run out of time. So we do have one final presentation from Sarah Hunt, who will be giving the kind of closing remarks for the day. But as she comes up to prepare, we're just going to give you guys 5 minutes, shake it out. Debra reminded us of the importance of moving that body. So if you want to stand, shake it out, we'll start in 5 minutes. So don't run far.